Hello and welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
My name is Matt.
And today's episode is all about experiments gone wrong. So we're back with our time travel theme for this series. And today's episode, we're going to be looking at Je t'aime from 1968 and The Jacket from 2005. So how did you get on with these two, first off, Matt?
Really enjoyed both of these films, and I'm really looking forward to talking about them. What about you?
Yeah, no, I had a really good time watching these ones. They were sort of like, I would say they're both very different, but they've got a lot of themes that they share. And I think the two central characters are both similar kinds of time traveler as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting to go back to the science behind the time travel. We talked about mad scientists a couple of weeks ago when we had Doc Brown and H.G. Wells in Back to the Future and the Time Machine. And now we're kind of looking at the scientists are not really the big characters in these films. It's more about the experiments that they're conducting and the maybe nefarious in one case and more altruistic in the other intentions behind these experiments that they're doing.
They're both time travel films that focus on the characters' personal journeys as well. It's kind of like a personal history style of film, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll get into that, but they're both bringing a lot of personal baggage to their time travel adventures.
As a quick heads up before we get going, the films we discuss in today's episode feature characters with various mental health problems. We also discuss a depiction of an on-screen suicide, so if that's not for you, feel free to give this one a miss and join us next time. If not, listen on as we discuss Je t'aime from 1968.
So, Je t'aime from 1968, directed by Alain Resnais, French New Wave time travel movie. Have you ever seen this film before?
No, this is my first time watching it, and I've got to say it was a pleasant surprise because I know a lot of French New Wave and the sort of avant-garde cinema, they can be quite a hefty watch, I'd say, but this was it was really pleasant for me. I really enjoyed it. It took you along the narrative in a very nice way, which we'll get into. But yeah, no, this is my first time watching it.
Yeah, same. I'm a little bit familiar with our old friend Alain Resnais. Do you remember his first movie, Hiroshima Mon Amour, that we both studied at university? Do you remember that one?
I've got to be honest, I can't remember it, which is terrible. But I did see that he'd done that. But it didn't ring any bells when I saw that name. What do you remember about that one?
I remember that we all had a very difficult time trying to watch that film and none of us enjoyed it. But there's definitely similarities, and it's really interesting that Alain Resnais's gone back to his clear interest in the way memory functions and the way memory stays with us, because Hiroshima Mon Amour is a new wave art film about love and relationships and memories and the bombing of Hiroshima in 1945, and it's told through a conversation, just like one long conversation between a man and a woman who had a fling. The guy's Japanese, the woman's French, and they're reflecting on just the nature of relationships and memories, and also what happened to Japan at the end of the Second World War. I would quite like to watch it again now with a bit more maturity on my side, because I didn't enjoy it when I was a teenager. And also having seen Je t'aime and kind of looking at this theme that maybe runs through Alain Resnais's films.
Well, I seem to have wiped that entire film out of my memory, so I think maybe I should go and revisit that one as well.
So Je t'aime features Claude. I won't do the French accent all the time. Who he's just survived a suicide attempt, but we don't really know that at the start of the film. He's getting out of hospital for an undisclosed medical condition. He's immediately picked up by some sci-fi goons and scooped off to this wonderful world of scientific experimentation. What were you thinking at the start of the movie? What did you think was going on?
I didn't know what was happening to start off with, because it's very it's kind of like, I think both of these films, they go for that sort of mystery box element. So it's kind of like you don't really know what's happening going in, and you find stuff out, and the story sort of unravels as you go. So seeing him just taken away from this hospital, and even at the start, it felt like, so this film juggles a lot of editing and sort of flipping between the past and the present. I wasn't sure if that's what it was doing at the start, because they say, oh, he's just come out of an operation, it was a success. But then they say, oh, we want to do this other experiment on him. And I sort of like got a bit confused with that bit at the very start. But it transpires that he had a suicide attempt. And that's why he has this operation at the start, because they save his life when he shot himself. And then, then these goons come in, and then there's the experiment element. So yeah, that's when it gets more sci-fi, doesn't it?
Yeah, they kind of jump straight into it. They're talking Claude through their little research center, the Crespel research center that they're working in, and they get into it quite quickly. They've got some mice in big jars, and they're explaining that one of them is a time traveler. So they've had this completely successful trip through time, they believe, and now they need to try it on a human so that someone can come back and tell them about it. They don't get bogged down too much in how they can be so sure that the mouse went back in time. They're moving swiftly on from mouse to human. But I do like the way it kind of played out at the start of the film, where they're just like walking him through, this is what we've done, this is what we're doing, this is why we want you. And it all seems very like official and professional, even though by the end of the film, I wasn't quite sure how official and professional these guys were. There is an element at the start, because they're very fixated on him, aren't they? They're like, he's the guy we need. He's perfect for this. We must have him. And that kind of raised questions as the film went on about what's so special about Claude and how professional are you really being about this? Do you know what I mean? Like, with the way they were behaving.
Yeah. So it comes down to like, why do we think Claude was right for this, and why does he make a good time traveler in the film? So there's like, so obviously the first thing that springs to mind is the fact he's expendable, because they start off and they make it clear that he had a suicide attempt, and therefore he doesn't really care about his life.
Yeah.
So that makes him a good test subject. So that's one of the reasons. But there's a few other things as well they sort of like go into as the film goes on. So what were the things that you picked up on first? What reasons were there that make him a good candidate?
So I think you're right about the suicide thing, that he's viewed as expendable in the eyes of the scientists. So they're able to coax his thinking a little bit to the point where even he recognizes it in himself. They make a point of saying it's not a kidnapping. He's going along with them willingly because he really has given up on life. And I think he even says he's going to try suicide again. He's got no issues with trying it again. And, that's still on his mind. And then on top of that, he's also someone who's totally haunted by his past and obsessed with the recent past and his distant past. And again, like I said, it's a film like René's earlier film that is obsessed with memory and the impact that memory has on a person. He is the perfect specimen of someone who is completely fixated on something that happened in his past. So maybe that's helpful for a time traveler. If you're going to send them back into the past, it needs to be somebody who is in that mindset, who is ready to go and dwell on their past experiences. I think it maybe backfires for Claude and for the experiment, because he's so fixated and so obsessed with his own past. And that's where we start our experiment going wrong, right? Because he kind of gets trapped there.
But also there's things about his character which you sort of find out as the film goes on. So his jobs, the specific jobs that he has. So one of them is he's like, he checks people's writings and checks them for sort of like spelling errors and things like that. And he has another job where he's sort of like very methodical about sort of like counting stuff out and ordering things. And all of his jobs are about sort of like memory and making things and putting them into order. So I think that makes him a good candidate as well, because his personality is someone who's his jobs all reflect this kind of like ability to order things. And he goes into a big speech at one point about a pencil and like being able to focus on one thing at a time. And then like, okay, so if I'm focusing on this pencil, I focus on the fact that it's red and that it's made of lead, and it's like it writes in black and all this kind of thing. And he's very good at concentrating on certain moments, which I think is one of the reasons why he gets enrolled into this experiment.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I hadn't really picked up on that, to be honest. When I was watching it, I was kind of treating some of the scenes as just like disposable, and I was kind of waiting for the relationship things and trying to like sort through the other things as less important. But I think you're absolutely right. We're being carefully presented moments in Claude's career that paint this picture of a man with a great deal of focus and concentration and attention to detail, and that might add to his ability to be a successful, perhaps too successful, time traveler in this film. So we see him early in his career, and he doesn't want to do this job, does he? I think he's always working in the publishing sphere, but he kind of just starts like packaging the magazines to go out for sale. But he's plucked out from that because he's good at it, because he's got these skills, and he rises up through the company. He does all those other jobs that you mentioned. He's a proofreader, and I didn't quite understand what he was doing, but it all revolved around that attention to detail, didn't it?
Yeah. And I think that's it. That's like an important part of his character, that attention to detail, which might be some of the reason why he has such vivid memories of stuff. I mean, he is traveling into his past, but there's reasons for each of the memories that we're shown throughout the film. But I think we should talk a little bit about the time machine itself and how it works. So what did you think of the time machine in this film?
It's really cool. It's like a big blobby igloo, right?
Yeah.
With some spines at the top.
That's it. And there was there's a line in the jacket which made me think back to this, because I watched them back to back. And the jacket refers to, I won't talk too much about that yet, but it talks about the time machine as like a womb. And that's exactly what it is in Jatem. It looks like a womb, and then he's in this weird, it looks like a beanbag, but it's like a fleshy beanbag, and he's kind of like sunk into it. And yeah, it's really surreal, isn't it? This little igloo womb thing that he's in.
It's surreal, but it looks cozy as hell. You're right. It does look like a fleshy beanbag, and that kind of makes it sound disgusting, but it's also a really accurate description. And I'd quite like to have a lie down on it. It looks nice, you know?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to be doing some time traveling, you might as well be comfy.
And the point of that is that he's going to be drugged up and completely incapacitated but awake, so he won't be able to move his body while the experiment's happening, but they need him to be awake and conscious to experience everything. So they give him this comfy, relaxing surrounding to be in, but it's very it is kind of like psychedelic new wave meets sci-fi, because it looks so strange and trippy and blobby, but it's also like it looks like a real sci-fi device. Yeah,
it's really good, that whole time machine and the way it looks and all of that kind of stuff. And the whole premise of the experiment is interesting as well, isn't it? Because they say, right, we're going to take you back in time for like 1 minute. So it's going to be 1 minute in your past, 4 o'clock on a certain date. And he already knows where he'll be. He'll be on holiday because he was in France. He was somewhere in France having a lovely time, he remembers. So it's only supposed to be for 1 minute. But this is where we get the experiment goes wrong part of the film. So we know this is going to happen. We know it's not going to be for a minute that he's going to be there. But things sort of spiral out of control. And it's really jarring the way this happens, because he when he goes into the time traveling machine and actually goes back in time, he starts off and he's underwater, and it's sort of like a weird perspective, and you can't quite figure out where he is or what's going on. And then you find out he's snorkeling, and then he's sort of walking backwards on the coast. But he's doing that. He did that in the past anyway, but the fact he is walking backwards makes it look even more like he's rewinding time a bit. So that's happening, and that's like, it's a really weird way to sort of set that up.
Yeah, it's a nice, simple little. It's not even a special effect, but it makes it look like it's a special effect because he's backing out of the water because he's wearing flippers because he's just been snorkeling, and that's how you have to. Well, that would be the easiest way to back up onto the shore and take your flippers off. But because you can't see the flippers, they're underwater. It creates this weird kind of strange effect where you think it's playing in reverse, and it's like a little visual joke, isn't it?
Yeah, and it works so well, but then it's sort of like it takes a turn, doesn't it? Because this is where we get all this fantastic editing in the film, and this really like made me feel uncomfortable, this bit, when it starts repeating bits and jumping. It jumps around in time and sort of you can't quite figure out where he's going to go. And sort of like it jumps a few bits and then you see him in the beanbag and you see him again sort of like in this time period. And then it jumps to a different time period. And it's all quite like quick and jarring to start off with. How did that sort of initial part of the film make you feel?
Slightly uncomfortable. It is a difficult film to watch. I got into it and I settled into it, and it's certainly not as alienating as some French New Wave films can be. It kind of gets into a rhythm that becomes easier to follow. Certainly there's a 20, 30-minute period where it's just chopping through memories and jumping through memories. It keeps coming back to that day on the beach, either because it's a really significant moment to Claude or because it's the intended destination of the experiment. That's never quite made clear. But he's always like bouncing around. It's interesting that the film kind of follows a very stereotypical Hollywood time travel plot, as in there's an experiment, he's drawn into this scientific world, gets put in the machine, gets sent back in time, and then the rest of the story happens. But the new wave aspect is that all happens quite quickly at the start, and then almost the entirety of the rest of the film is like an extended montage of memories, isn't it? The plot you have to pick out from what you're given, which is why I was really like clinging to those relationship bits, because I was really just trying to like hold on to the through line of the narrative, and I didn't pick up on the more subtle stuff about Claude's character. It's very similar to what we saw in Alphaville when we looked at that last series, or 2 series ago in our AI series. The French New Wave directors having this love-hate relationship with Hollywood. They want to play around with the Hollywood tropes of time travel, or in Godard's case, the hard-boiled sci-fi detective kind of character, but they want to also reject those tropes and just reject the sort of conventional sense of Hollywood narrative and do something experimental with it.
Yeah, and they sort of like, they do have moments where it kind of like goes to the scientists as the experiment's going on. They do sort of like do a few cuts like there just to sort of keep the main thread of what this is an experiment. This is like a time travel film. So they've got bits of that in, but you're right. The main bit, the core of the film, is these sort of like memory flashes, and yeah, like it starts off very jarring, but then you settle into it, and like I really sort of like got into those moments as well, and you get used to the pacing of things. You kind of know when it's going to transition into something else. And then you are sort of piecing together this puzzle of what Claude's life was like, because you've already got this massive sort of like question mark over why he committed suicide or why he attempted to commit suicide in the first place. So you're constantly wondering that, like what led him up to that. And you see him so happy in this sort of like moment in time when he's with Katrine, and then sort of like from there to there, you're trying to piece it together and seeing sort of like all of these sporadic moments. It's just like, yeah, you're right. Like I can see exactly why you wouldn't focus on the work aspects of the flashbacks. But for me, like a lot of this was, it's his life flashing before his eyes, isn't it? It's sort of like the old cliche. And in that you're seeing sort of like how much of his life was work-based and how much was sort of like love and actually living it and all this kind of stuff, because he's quite a complex character as well, isn't he? Because he's going through a lot with Katrine, sort of like who turns out to be like the love of his life, but he's also like having all these affairs and things like that. It's like, what did you think of Claude as a character in terms of that and like his relationships.
I just thought he was kind of like a bit of a broken person. And again, it feeds into what made him a candidate for the Crespel research team. There was always problems with him. You know, he couldn't be faithful to a partner. He hates his job. There's a great scene where I can't remember which role he's doing. I'm not sure it's even made clear which position he's in the company. But he's just sitting behind his desk, complaining that time has stood still for 100 years, and it's 3 p.m. in his office, and it's been 3 p.m. for days, and he's just stuck here trying to write a meaningless letter to someone. And that was, again, it was a nice little joke referencing what was going on with the time travel, but it also says a lot about the kind of life he was living and how miserable he was in his job that it looks like he spent his entire career doing. He just moved up the ladder in this company and seemingly hated it, right?
Yeah, he didn't look like he was having a very good time, especially in that particular moment.
In fact, isn't the reason he's attracted to Katrine in the first place is that she also has no respect for the job and the company, and she's very like brazen about it. She's really good at it. She can like stuff envelopes faster than anyone ever has. But she also just wants to walk out and she's not interested. And if she loses her job this morning, fine, she won't come back in the afternoon. And he's attracted to this quality in her, this kind of dismissive carefreeness.
And then but then like, why is Katrine so carefree? So it turns out like later on in somewhere in the timeline he refers to it as a terminal illness, but then they're not clear as to what that is. So I don't know if they're referring to her depression or something like that. What did you sort of take from that?
She has cancer, but it's literally only mentioned once. They're in a restaurant at some point, and again, it's not clear where in the timeline. It might be the trip to Glasgow that they take, or it might be before that. But yeah, she says something like it might take 3 months or it might take 30 years. That's just the nature of cancer or something like that. And then it's never referenced again. But I think you've got to assume that that's... I think it's also not entirely clear that it's Katrine saying that, because you only see the back of her head. And obviously Claude meets with a lot of women with long, mousy brown hair. It's not always clear. I struggle to tell who's talking to it sometimes. But yeah, I'm pretty sure she has cancer. And I think that's why they go to Glasgow together. And she also has this crippling depression as well on top of that she's had for a long time, it seems, that we see through flashes.
Yeah, because there's moments where Claude is saying like, oh, Katrine's not coming because she doesn't want to leave the house and this kind of thing. So you don't know, because they're together for 7 years, I think they say at one point, or something like that. So obviously they've had like so much time together, but then during that time, there's sort of like, you see all the highs and the lows, and then obviously all the stuff with like her illness and dealing with that. And Claude views her in certain bits as a burden as well. So I don't know if that's during her illness or if that's sort of like during her depressions, sort of like moments. But he's constantly saying, like, he says some horrendous stuff, like,
yeah,
oh, if I could like see this woman, then I'd gladly send Katrine to hell and stuff like that. I mean, you know he doesn't mean it, but he says all these things which are quite sort of like, that paints him in a very dark light.
So we learn that she dies fairly early on. I think he says that when he's coming to in the machine and then drifting back in time again. And I think he mentions that she's dead at that point. So we know that she died, and you can kind of join the dots early on that his suicide attempt might have been related to that. It's not until, I think, well past the halfway point where he starts talking about her in terms of having killed her, as in he killed her. And we're seeing him kind of confessing that to another woman sometime after her death. So we're adding on these layers of guilt to Claude and the things that he's done. And yeah, like you said, he said some horrible things. And then around the halfway point, we start to think maybe he actually killed her in the end, and those awful things that he said came to pass. So we're building up this picture of Claude and the guilt that he's feeling. We know it was enough to lead to a suicide attempt. but we maybe are starting to understand at this point of the film that it's also enough to make him become stuck in the past, because like you said, we're dropping back in with the scientists from time to time, and we know that the experiment's gone very wrong. I wasn't sure how long he was in the machine. I think they say at the very end, but you don't know how much time has passed. But he's only supposed to be in the past for 1 minute and then a 4-minute cool-off period. So it's gone pretty wrong pretty quickly, but they don't have a choice. They can't pull him out because he's not physically there. His body disappears when he's back in time. So
yeah, he keeps bouncing around, doesn't he? Phasing through time.
Yeah, with his little mouse friend.
Yeah. So this thing as well. So with the mouse, so he sees the mouse in one of the memories, doesn't he? Or like when he's traveling back in time, and then he notices the mouse. But this other interesting part of the film is, in most time travel films, the time traveler has some sort of like agency. They can sort of like interact with the past or the future, and they can do stuff. But in this, Claude seemingly has no control. He's just reliving the past.
No control, and I'd even say like his physicality is slightly uncertain. I was never quite sure if he was in a like being John Malkovich situation, watching the world through his own eyes, or as a third person observer, like we are watching it like a film playing. He certainly wasn't like taking the place of past Claude and doing stuff in the past because everything was just unfolding as it did as a memory. So like you're right, he's got no agency. But even further than that, I'm not even sure where his physical body existed when he's in the past.
Yeah, like whether he's actually in there, or like I love the idea of him watching it as like a third party and just seeing it like a completely out of body experience, just watching this entire thing unfold and not being able to change anything.
Yeah. Do you ever experience your memories like that? I sometimes kind of dream in the third person. I don't think I experience my memories that way, but I can kind of see how you might when you're kind of like telling the story of your own life to yourself. You might sort of imagine a situation. You might not have this first person visual memory of it, but you remember how things went down, so you sort of picture it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I can see what you mean. Like, I think that's one, like you talking about that reminded me of like the intro bit, like when it's doing those jarring cuts and things like that, and you can't quite get a sense of what's going on. There's like, sometimes I get this feeling where if things seem like they're slowing down, which is like sort of like an anxious thing, and then you imagine you can't sort of like get out of your head that everything's in slow motion for some weird reason. And sort of seeing that made me sort of anxious, seeing that sort of like the way it was cut and the jarringness of not having that control over where you are. So like that sort of time aspect.
Yeah, some of it is quite anxiety inducing, and it's certainly in the early part where it's very jarring and very jumpy. It's almost like experiencing intrusive thoughts, because it's quite clear. We know going in that the scuba diving, the snorkeling memory is the destination target. That's where he should be, because he's already said he was on vacation a year ago. And then when everything starts jumping around, it is a bit like recreating the experience of an intrusive thought, a bad memory popping in when you're trying to remember a nice memory. I just want to think about that nice time with Katrine on the beach when I went snorkeling, and I saw some snakes and some sharks. But I'm jumping back to working in the publishing house, stuffing envelopes. I'm jumping back to arguments, and I'm jumping back to her being depressed and stuff like that. It's got that anxiety-inducing experience of watching an intrusive thought happen in real time.
Because the whole time he is trying to get control of this time travel, isn't it? Because he knows that he can't get out of this like weird time machine until the scientists let him out. But he goes for on this rant when he's in the room, and he's sort of like stationary in one time for a second. And he's saying like, right, I need to control this. I need to sort of like get hold of this. I will just focus on this one thought. And then he keeps saying like, je t'aime. He's talking about Katrine. He's trying to focus on that memory, the fact that she was the love of his life, and sort of like, but then every time he does, he automatically thinks about all the darker ones and the other parts of their sort of life together, because you do fall in love with her character as well when you're watching it, because like all the weird, like funny, quirky lines that she has, and they're all part of her sort of personality. Like when she's talking about the trams and cats basically being the rulers of the world, and all these like weird little bits which kind of like are charming and sort of quirky. And you can see why Claude has those feelings for her. And you sort of see all the aspects of their relationship, like the good, the bad, everything. You see it all intertwined. And it's like, that's what I find so interesting about it, because you get such a full picture of their characters.
Yeah, she's very charming. She's like an early manic pixie dream girl. Like you do get into this, you get sucked into their relationship where you see what Claude's attracted to, but also how difficult it is them being together, and they're not a good match. They've both got baggage and problems, and they can't support each other, and it's very tragic, isn't it? And you know that it's going to end tragically with one of them dying and one of them attempting suicide. It's painful to watch all of that unfold, knowing that it doesn't have a happy ending for them.
But it's also interesting the way he's going back in time as well, because there's moments where it turns into like fantasy memories almost. Like there's the bit with the woman on the bathtub in his office when he's remembering that one time when he was in a train toilets and someone was asking him to like wash her or something. It's really weird, this little story that he tells. But then you see moments where things don't quite match up. So it's like there's the woman on the bathtub and she appears again a few times. So those moments, and the fact you brought up the sort of like the manic pixie dream girl, this film has a lot of similarities with Eternal Sunshine, doesn't it? Because that is all about going through memories, and it takes a more surreal approach in that film. But there must have been like direct influence from this, because there's so many bits which sort of bleed into both.
Yeah, it's a man with painful memories of a former lover who is sort of voluntarily forced to physically relive them and go through those memories. I can't remember Jim Carrey's character's name in Eternal Sunshine, but he's got some agency. He's kind of running around in his own mind, but he's always drawn back to what really happened. He can't force a memory to play out differently, even though he actively tries, I think, in that film. Claude, like we said, doesn't even have that level of agency. He's just got to watch it all happen again, which I think makes it more tragic, because obviously Eternal Sunshine builds up to quite a happy, positive ending where he has this like self-realization that he doesn't want to do this memory experience and he wants to be back with the girl. Claude goes into this knowing that he would like to be back with the girl, but she's dead and there's nothing he can do about it. So it's just it's a bit of a torturous experience for him, and I guess but he didn't count on that going in. He thought he was just going to be there for 1 minute.
The thing is as well, because you don't know if Claude, there's two sort of like ways you can see it. Did Claude intentionally, so when Katrine's killed, she basically dies because there's like a gas leak. So you don't find out really definitively if it's something that Claude could smell when he left, or if it happened and he kind of like, because of his neglect to Katrine, he just kind of let it happen because he was out having another affair with another woman. So yeah, like I think also that adds another element, because he's feeling this guilt, and the guilt is even more because like he knows how badly he treated her, yet she was the love of his life. So it sort of like mounts it up even more.
Yeah, we get drip drops of information. So like I said, about halfway through, he starts talking about it in terms of I killed her. And then you keep coming back to that conversation that he has with someone else. And it's like a confession. So you start to think that he took her up to Glasgow and murdered her because he couldn't stand being with her. And then quite close to the end, like you said, it's actually a gas leak, and it's just left unclear whether he knew there was a gas leak, or even if he's lying about the gas leak, because he says, "Oh, I just told you that stuff about killing her to see how you'd react," I think is what he says. it is left very open. I think all you can take away from that definitively is that Claude feels incredibly guilty about her dying. Whether he murdered her with his bare hands or accidentally left a burner on and didn't notice, he's carrying the guilt of that death with him, regardless of the circumstances.
And that guilt, they sort of like mirror it in a lot of the themes, because obviously the first time he goes into the past, he's swimming. And then you see another bit where him and Katrine are walking past a crime scene, and some man has drowned because he couldn't, and he apparently was a really good swimmer, but he drowned anyway. And this whole idea of sort of like drowning in your memories and your emotions is kind of another nice little sort of analogy that they're doing in this. Sort of like all of that stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, and again, I just didn't pick up on any of this. You're making me want to watch it again now, because it is hard to follow the narrative, and I was just putting so much work into clinging to this relationship narrative that I just completely missed all of this other stuff that was going on, and that's what makes it a good film. We always have a good time discussing these films, but it's rare to uncover so much about a film through discussion after seeing it.
Yeah, and I think Je t'aime is definitely one of those films which we always say that about, like a few of the films we watch, it rewards repeat viewings. So it's definitely one that I'd quite like to revisit again at some point, because I think there's a lot more you can get about this story between Claude and Katrine, and sort of like unraveling that more. But yeah, like you said, it does end in tragedy. It ends with, so Claude can't get out of this weird time fluctuation that he's in. But then he sort of like randomly appears outside of the time machine.
Well, wait, just before that, the last memory that he experiences is his own suicide attempt, and it's filmed very powerfully and very startlingly, because I think it's all one long take, isn't it? We see him at a desk. And as with most scenes, we've got no idea what year it is, or how long ago it is. But he gets up, walks away from his desk, pulls a gun out, sits down, and shoots himself in the chest, all as one long take. And after a film of just constant montage, editing, disjointed memories, it's the longest single thing that we see happen in one go, and it's his most recent awful memory, which is his own guilt consuming him to the point where he decides to try and take his own life. But he wakes up outside the experiment. That's when they finally, the scientists are like, "Oh, we got to go in and pull him out. It's gone on too long." Or do they just give up?
They just give up, don't they? They just turn it all off and be like, "Oh, he's done for." And then they walk outside and he's there on the ground. But it looks like he's been shot, doesn't it? Or at least, So it's like whether he's gone back to that moment, because there is that question mark around like how much of it he is actually experiencing again, because like again with the mouse, like he sees the mouse, he recognizes the mouse on the beach, but at the end he's been shot, so he has revisited that moment in his past, but it's had an impact on him.
What it did make me wonder, what I thought might happen, and it doesn't happen, but I guess it's still a possibility, is that his body appearing with a bullet wound happened before the experiment took place, and them leaving that building was just coincidentally the group of scientists leaving a building and not them leaving the experiment. And then they took him to the hospital, and that's how they knew that Claude was the perfect candidate, because they had already found Claude's body a few weeks ago, took him to the hospital, dropped him off. So they knew that he was a time traveler. I thought something like that was going to happen, where we had like a loop happening, and the same scientists who took him to the hospital were the ones that picked him up because they had already met him and knew he was the perfect candidate, because it was all predetermined. But that is not what happens, and I may be completely reading into it too much, because the film ends pretty abruptly after that, doesn't it?
Yeah, Finn is how it ends.
Finn, yeah, classic French ending, which I think was how Alphaville ended as well.
Yeah. But yeah, that's an interesting take on it, because I didn't really think about that sort of switch to the ending. But even the way you explained it then, I was like, wow, that would throw a spanner in the works for that entire film.
I feel like I always say on this podcast that I don't like silly fan theories that like grasp at straws and make too much stuff up, but I also am the one that throws them out there and comes up with that stuff. But that was what I thought was going to happen as the end scene was playing out.
I mean, it would have been an interesting ending.
If it was remade by Hollywood, that's how it would have ended.
Yeah. Definitely. Be interesting to see if Hollywood could remake this. But I suppose Eternal Sunshine is the closest thing that we've had.
Yeah, I'm more interested in seeing a Hollywood artist be inspired by this film and kind of remix the concept than just a lazy remake. But I do think it's kind of like ripe for a lazy remake. Not that I'm condoning that. But the other film we're looking at this week is a bit more of a Hollywood treatment of a similar concept, but I don't think there's a straight line in terms of influence between these films. But should we take a look at The Jacket from 2005?
Let's do it.
You left me in there.
You're suffering from delusions.
Don't act like I don't know what's real.
That's where we need to go.
What am I gonna do with you? I know this sounds crazy. What year is this?
2007.
What?
So The Jacket from 2005, directed by John Mabry. Had you seen this film before then, Matt?
Yeah, I saw this about when it came out, and but my only memory of it was that I really liked it, and it was really stylish and cool and a clever little film, but I just couldn't remember any of the plot. I'm really bad with stuff like that. It all just falls out of my brain after a few years. Have you seen it?
Yeah, this was one of the ones that I got from my local video rental shop.
Nice.
So one of those ones from back in the day. But again, I couldn't remember too much about it. It was, I remember there was some sort of time travel aspect and there was a jacket involved, hence the title. But yeah, it was nice sort of revisiting this one and sort of not knowing exactly what to expect.
Yeah, I think the fact that the jacket, without jumping too far ahead, the jacket is never really explained what it is and what it does. So to make that the title of the film, I think that might be part of what makes it quite hard to remember, because you see the name and you think, I've seen that. Yeah, what was the jacket? What does the jacket do? I don't actually know, because you never find out.
Exactly. But again, we've got a time traveler in this who's got a very sort of tragic life. So he's quite similar to Claude in that respect. So we're following Adrien Brody, who plays Jack Starks. So Jack Starks is a character who fought in the war. He was a Gulf War veteran. And he's sent to a mental institution, isn't he, for insane criminals. But you sort of like see the lead into that. So it starts off and he was shot in the head in the war. And he says, this was the first time that I died when he was 27. And then he sort of like leaves the army, he survives this headshot. And then he ends up in this weird altercation where he's getting a ride from someone. And the someone he's got into a car with decides to shoot a policeman, and we don't really find out too much about this part of the story. But that's what leads to his incarceration in the mental institution.
Yeah, again, that first 10 minutes is played out. It is a little bit similar to Je t'aime, Je t'aime. It's a jumble of disjointed memories that we, as the audience, are not really invited to decode clearly. We just know that this mix-up leads to him being imprisoned. I thought the very beginning was really interesting, the stuff with him in the war, because we've got a mixture of... It was clear that it was a flashback because we're given the date as 1991. It was made in 2005. So we're dealing with some sort of flashback memory stuff. So if you kind of assume that you're looking at a memory of this experience in war, then after he gets shot, on top of that, like you said, the narration comes in and he says, I was 27 when I died the first time. So you've got this mix of memories and also an omniscient narrator speaking from an undisclosed future date. So you're looking into the past, but also speaking from the future, and you're mixing the two up together. So you've got this disjointed sense of timelines already, even if perhaps you don't know you're watching a time travel film yet. If you've not like read a synopsis or whatever, you're just kind of going in blind.
And also it's setting up that tragedy early on, because he's saying the first time I died, that kind of implies that he's going to die again by the end of the film. At least it did for me when I was sort of like heard that bit of narration. So he ends up in this mental institution. But so before that though, he's met He's met this mother and daughter on the road as well, who we come back to. But this is like a very short segment, and he's wandering along. He's a bit of a drifter. He helps these two get their car going. The little girl takes a shine to him, and that's sort of like all we see of them. And then he's hitchhiking, and then this tragic thing happens to him.
Yeah, he's living a little bit like Rambo at that point, isn't he? He's this war veteran with PTSD. We know that much. And he's just like hitchhiking around the country, trying to keep himself to himself. It really reminded me of Rambo, except things go even worse for him than they do for Rambo in the first Rambo film, and he ends up, being locked up, like you said.
And they sort of set him up as a character because in a lot of films depicting sort of like veterans and people which have seen war and have seen these sort of like really like horrendous things and have lived through these tragedies, they're sort of like there's something that it's affected them deeply and mentally, and that's kind of the angle that they go for at the start, because that's why he gets blamed for this cop shooting, because they think he's a bit unhinged because of all of his like stuff that he saw in the Gulf War.
But those experiences are what keeps him out of like a maximum security prison and into a hospital, because he's found not guilty by reasons of insanity, right? So he's not guilty, but he's still incarcerated, ostensibly for his own good and for his own health. But that's where things go pretty badly for Jack, because the institute that he gets put in is I don't know, how would you describe it? Not very reputable.
Yeah, they're doing some dodgy stuff in this mental home. This is like, he's like Claude in the respect that he hasn't got much going for him at this point in his life. He's stuck in this institute, he can't get out, and there's a doctor, Dr. Becker, who decides that he's going to be part of his experiment. Now, this is where it all starts getting a little bit weird, doesn't it? So, yeah, what did you think about the experiment itself?
I love how just horrifying it was. It's so unpleasant, and you're really in it with Jack, and you're having that horrible experience. I love the casting of Chris Christopherson as Dr. Becker, because Chris Christopherson is like a grizzly old man, and I'm pretty sure he's been a grizzly old man since he was like 15 years old. He's just not a convincing doctor, is he? You would not be very reassured if Chris Christopherson was leaning over your bed in hospital. You wouldn't think like, oh, I'm in safe hands here. Or maybe I'm not giving him enough credit. Maybe he's just a very good actor, and he was able to give that sense on screen in this film. But I think he's really well cast. And then the whole design of the set and the hospital, it's dirty and grimy, and the color palette is just completely drained out, isn't it? Everything's just washed out and white and grey, and the jacket itself is filthy and ragged. It's not even like a straight jacket it's filmic shorthand for a scary thing and a scary person, but this isn't even a straight jacket. It's not as clean or white as a straight jacket should be. It's dirty and brown and torn, and it's got weird holes in it for drugs to be pumped into you. All of it is so gross and creepy that first experience of him being put in the jacket and in the box is brilliant, terrifying.
Yeah, so he's given this weird drug, which Dr. Becker has been sort of like experimenting with, I assume, and he's put into this body drawer, and he's just left there. And at first he's only left there for a little while, but they do it again, and he's there for like an entire night. And this is where Jack begins the sort of time travel. And it's completely unexpected. If you didn't know this was a time travel film, you wouldn't sort of initially think it going in, because it's sort of like you could market it as like a psychological horror, that kind of thing. But he's in this body drawer, and he starts flashing back, doesn't he, in his mind, and he's getting all these weird visions.
Yeah, you think it's going to be a memory film, and it would be very, very similar to Je t'aime, because he's got these flashes. He's got PTSD, and he's reliving some of that when he first goes in the drawer. And there's no real time travel in that first hour that he spends in the drawer. But crucially, when he comes out, he didn't he didn't lose consciousness. Is that it? He didn't get knocked out by the process. So it's implied that Dr. Becker is kind of impressed by his ability. You know, people normally are knocked out by this process after 1 hour. So there's something special about Jack. He is singularly equipped to go back in this drawer and have these experiences even before any of that time travel stuff's happened. But yeah, he doesn't go back into those traumatic memories. Like you said, it's quite surprising the first time you see it. He's hurtled into the future the first time he has a proper time travel experience.
And the fact that this isn't actually meant to be a time travel experiment is interesting as well, because Dr. Becker is just trying to, like, he says you can't break something that's already broken, and he's referring to these patients as already being broken, so he can do whatever he wants to them, and then if he fixes them, that's a bonus. So he's trying these really extreme therapies, and this whole thing is supposed to sort of like, I don't know what it's supposed to do to him, but it's supposed to sort of like give him some sort of like out-of-body experience that will make him no longer the crazy person that everybody assumes him to be.
Becker says the drugs and the experience of going in the locker, the morgue tray, are going to curb his violent tendencies, I think he says to another doctor. And at that point in the film, I assumed that was a lie, because like you said, it's not, they're not trying to make them travel in time. But I didn't know that. I thought, well, you know, we've got a mad scientist here. He's discovered time travel or something, and the treatment, the medical aspect is just a cover for his time travel experiments. But like you said, it's not. It's purely by accident. It's just presumably it's the character's innate abilities, and the drugs are enhancing those. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because he's. They sort of like mislead you in that aspect, don't they? Because he also says early on, the time is important, because one of the other orderlies says, right, we should take him out. We shouldn't leave him in there all night. But he's like, no, they need to be in there for that certain amount of time. So it kind of like leads you down the path of thinking, okay, so it is some sort of like direct time travel thing. But no, Becker is just doing it as a sort of therapy.
Yeah, and we kind of get that revelation at the end where Jack has the opportunity to confront Becker in the future, and I would say there's no ambiguity there. Becker doesn't have a lot of empathy for his patients, but he was legitimately just trying to do these psychological experiments to heal people through medicine, which is a very weird twist for a time travel film, right? The time travel is just happening completely by fluke while another plot was happening.
Yeah, it's very unexpected, isn't it? So I know when we talked about the sort of like early time travel concepts and that kind of thing, we were talking about a lot of sort of like old stories and books. So it's interesting that this film is actually loosely based on a book from 1915. Now, did you know anything about this? Like, it's a book called The Star Rover.
No, that's a great name for a book, though. What happens in the book?
So I only found a brief bit of this online. So basically, it's about a professor who's serving life imprisonment, and he's imprisoned for like murder apparently, and the prison officials try to break his spirit by using this jacket, which is supposed to be like a torture device. And they sort of like they lace him up really tight in this thing, and it's supposed to sort of like induce angina, is what it said online. Then he sort of like, when he's sort of like in this state, he discovers a way to withstand this weird torture by entering a kind of trance. And during this trance, he sort of like does weird stuff, like he walks among the stars and experiences portions of past lives. It's like a reincarnation kind of thing. So he sees his past selves. And that kind of like made me think about the out-of-body aspect you were talking about in Jetem Jetem. So this is kind of like another out-of-body time travel, isn't it? Because in The Jacket, the film, he is sort of like having this out-of-body experience. His body is in this weird body drawer, this morgue, yet his mind and himself are like projected forward into 2007, where he's sort of like leading another life. So it's interesting, this sort of like idea of like projecting yourself as part of a time travel concept.
Yeah, they don't get into it in this film, but it's like astral projection, isn't it? Where you just supposedly you're able to meditate, and then you can teleport your consciousness and more and your own physicality into another dimension or whatever. That's essentially what Jack's doing, and the meditation that you're talking about and the concentration. Again, that's very similar to what Claude does in Je t'aime. It's this ability to focus. It's like an anti-mindfulness, isn't it? Where, you know, when you're practicing mindfulness, you need to be just present in your surroundings and just pay attention to exactly what's happening. These characters have to do the opposite of that and just laser focus on. Well, Claude's laser focused on a memory in Je t'aime, or trying to, and Jack has to just kind of stay calm, right? He's given this advice by Daniel Craig's character, Roy, I think.
Yeah, and seeing Daniel Craig in this was a complete surprise.
Yeah, I always love seeing Daniel Craig pop up in pre-Casino Royale films because I genuinely think he's a really good actor, but I don't think it's unfair to say he never like made a name for himself until he was Bond. So he's always just like great, and you're like, oh, it's Daniel Craig. Like you would have appreciated his performance when you first saw it, but now he's Daniel Craig doing it. It's like, oh, cool.
And he's so skinny. It's weird seeing him sort of like pre-Bond, like pre sort of like intensive workouts as well, and just playing this completely like scatterbrained character in this.
He's very Brad Pitt in 12 Monkeys.
Yeah, it's got a lot of 12 Monkeys comparisons, this one.
I knew it. I knew it! You know, those little fuckers are everywhere. They only recruit the best, Mackenzie.
Calm down, Mr. Stark.
Stay calm. See, stay calm. Always ordering us. Stay calm. Be calm. Be calm. Be calm. Is that an order? You gonna order me to be calm? I mean, the fuck are we supposed to be calm? Look at this place. And people, wake up, okay? Orders come from the top only. Don't let them order you around, Mackenzie. Long live the organization. Long live the organization for the organized.
Again, like Je t'aime, you've got this mystery box angle to this film. So we find out more about Jack's life and what's happened to him and what's going to happen to him in these sort of like flash forwards into sort of 2007, where he meets Jackie, who turns out to be the little girl who he met previously. He also remembers the fact that he didn't shoot this policeman, it was some other guy, but they gloss over that really quickly. We're like, no, we don't care about that. We just want to focus on 2007 and this girl who is now a woman, and Keira Knightley in the future.
Yeah. Do you think it was weird that she was called Jackie and he's called Jack and the film's called The Jacket?
When you say it like that, it's pretty weird.
It only like dawned on me at the very end of the film where, I mean, you know both their names, but there's a scene at the end where they're like addressing each other by name. And I was like, oh, they're both called Jack and the film's called The Jacket. Like this is deliberate, but why? Why would you do this? It's really odd.
It's just like, how many times can you put the word Jack into the film?
Very strange. But he goes and meets her in the future, and like you said, he learns pretty quickly. He learns on his first trip to the future about his own imminent death in 1993, New Year's Day, which is 4 days away in his present day timeline. So similar to Bill and Ted and Back to the Future, we've now got this like ticking clock on the present day situation, where if our time travelers can't sort things out using time travel, something awful is going to happen. The time travel in this film, until the very end, it's just like a fact-finding mission. Because he's able to go into the future, there's no issues with paradoxes, really, because the things haven't happened yet, so they're subject to change. So he's just out there, he's just asking questions. He's learned about his own death, so he just wants to go into the future and find out as much information as possible because he wants to do something about it in the present.
Yeah, and he's getting all this extra information as he goes. So like there's bits of stuff that he picks up, like the fact that the other doctor in the film, Dr. Lawrenson, so she's treating this little boy, and he finds out how she successfully treats him and what what sort of like helps this boy out, and then he brings that knowledge back to the past or to his present. So he's sort of like he's getting all this knowledge from the future and then taking it back. So like in the time machine, when George was initially wanted to go to the future and then bring back the knowledge, that's kind of what Jack is doing in this. He's bringing back all this knowledge to help himself out in present day.
Yeah, and then it kind of builds into a crescendo where he is going to do the whole time traveler, change the future, change the present, and actually take action in the present to make a difference in the future.
Yeah, because you wonder what he's going to be doing, because I didn't know first off if he was going to change the future or how he could do it, if it was like an inevitable thing, because a lot of these time travel films, it's kind of like you can't change the future or you can't change this because it's already set in stone. So I wasn't sure if they were going to flip it and do that, but they didn't, which I really liked. And they sort of like, so how does that sort of like happen? How does he end up changing the future?
He ends up, so Jackie in the future, he ends up falling in love with Jackie, which is a little bit weird because he just met her like just a short time ago as a tiny child. And I was thinking, like, we've now seen, like, I just think, like, romance in time travel films doesn't seem to work because or something creepy always seems to happen. Like Marty McFly with his mum was just weird. George in the time machine, like, falls in love with this woman who's, you know, like a child. You know, all these people that he meets in the future, just, like, they're not very intelligent. And that's a weird power dynamic. Charlton Heston was doing the same thing with Nova in Planet of the Apes. Like, it's just weird. Time travelers and their sexual partners, just, there's a lot of complicated stuff going on with it that is very uncomfortable to watch. But anyway, he falls in love with Jackie in the future, but she's got this crappy life. So the thing that he wants to do and change is make it so that her mother didn't die when she was younger, and that he thinks will basically just give her a better life all around. So he writes a letter, which again brings us back to that quote of, I was 27 when I died for the first time. And that's the genesis of that narration. And it is coming from this near omniscient view where he's had all this time travel experience, so he can step out of time and sort of see the world for what it is and manipulate it through a letter.
Yeah, because unlike Claude, he's got that agency. He can do stuff in the future, and he can sort of like affect how things are going to happen and sort of like change the future in some way. So in that way, he's gained control of an ability which sort of like came out of nowhere, really, this sort of time traveling ability which he gets from being in the drawer. So it's interesting that he can gain some sort of control over it, and he learns the rules as well, doesn't he? He learns that he'll be there for a finite amount of time. He's got to do that within that time. And if he finds this information, he can sort of bring it back. So he's sort of like, he is like a reluctant time traveler, but he's one who gauges the situation fairly quickly and is able to sort of like use it to his advantage. Yeah,
there's something about what Roy says to him about you've just got to keep calm and don't freak out and you won't trip out or something like that. And that flips something in Jack's head that gives him this incredible competency the next time he goes into the future. And he's like a superhero the final time he goes into the future, because he's like, he can walk up to anyone and just like challenge them on anything they're saying. He talks to all the doctors that he met in the past, and he pretends to be his own nephew, but he's one step ahead of them. He's always pushing them a little bit further, and tell me more about that. And who's the guy that he like challenges in the basement called Damon? Was that his former guard?
Yeah, he was one of the orderlies who put him in the drawer.
Yeah, who's now a patient at the hospital. And he's able to confront him and really like push his buttons to try and get an answer out of him. And he's so confident in that last trip because he's been told to just stay calm. It really empowers him and makes him a force to be reckoned with in the future.
I know you from somewhere.
I don't know, do you? I know you probably know my uncle, Jack Starks.
God damn, that's right. You were spitting him.
Yeah.
You could be his ghost.
You remember him, huh?
Oh, yeah, sure. He was a great guy.
You wouldn't happen to know how he died, now would you?
No. Just remember them finding his body.
Is that all you remember, David?
The idea of time travel in this, and time travel as a concept anyway, is like a mad idea. I know we talked about it previously, the fact that scientifically it's not entirely plausible. So is it a surprise that he ends up with people not believing him? I mean, he is in a mental institution, so people aren't going to believe him anyway. But there is this sort of like, I think it's going to develop as we look at more time travel films, but the connection between this is such a crazy idea, you must be mad, and people not believing them and then sort of like trying to prove them wrong. So yeah, do you think that's something which is sort of like teased at in this?
Yeah, it's the perfect setting for having accidental time travel happen, because no one would believe these characters who are suffering from severe mental illnesses when they start talking about going to the future. There's 3 distinct cases that have happened before. I think presumably they've all died under Dr. Becker's care. That's what Jack's able to use against him, that information about these guys. Roy's obviously experienced it as well, and Roy's quite unhinged. We see that in a lot of scenes. He doesn't always tell the truth, and he's clearly delusional. So when Dr. Lawrence and Jennifer Jason Leigh's character is saying, Jack, you're suffering from delusions, you're not crazy, but you are confused and you have an illness, you can understand why these characters would just not clock on, especially once it turns out that Becker is not a time travel mad scientist. He had no intention of doing it. It's not like he's covering up this big secret of time travel. He has no reason to believe it either, because he's just pumping them full of some crazy drugs from the 70s. He's got no idea he's going to send them through time.
It's this thing as well where if someone claims that they're a time traveler, you're instantly not going to believe them. And it's getting over that hurdle in these films, which I think is going to be a consistent thing. Like, it always makes me think of, have you seen Orange is the New Black?
No.
Well, there's a character in that who she's pretty crazy, and she believes that she can travel through time, and she builds this like weird time machine. Obviously it doesn't work, but it's kind of like, it's that kind of thing where you've got someone who really believes in this bizarre like contraption or bizarre sort of like concept, but there's no way of proving it. And sort of like, whereas in all these films, you've got to have someone able to prove it in some way. And I think Jack kind of does.
Yeah, how does he use that proof? How does he bring that proof to the present, to this new superpower that he's unlocked? How does he like use that in the present day?
Well, he's with the letter is the prime example, isn't it? And he says he knows from his past experience meeting Jackie, he knows about her nickname, and he sort of like says that to her mum. So that gives him sort of like a believability, something that no one else could possibly know. And he says the same thing when he sees Jackie in the future, like stuff about her past that no one else could know, that they'd first met on that road and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, he's sort of fulfilling what you would want from a time traveler. Like you said, if you met one in real life, your instinct would be to not believe them. But I also think everyone's instinct would be to start asking questions that only a time traveler could possibly answer. And Jack confronts that head on by getting the exact knowledge that he knows he's going to be asked. He also does it to Dr. Lawrenson as well, about her friend's child is sick with a neurological condition that she's trying to treat. It's a bit of a paradox. It's a complete paradox, because he just asked her in the future what was wrong with him. And I think Jackie looks it up online, and she's able to find out that he's having like micro seizures in his brain, and electroshock therapy will interrupt them. So he's finding out this exact knowledge to just say, you know that little boy, I know about that little boy that you're friends with, and you've told me about him, and I know exactly what's wrong with him. He's pinpointing these specific bits of information that will convince people he's a time traveler, which would also be like the perfect con if you're a con artist. And I'm sure this exists in the world, where people have convinced, people who are mentally unsound or little old ladies or whatever, I'm a time traveler. I know all about your first husband because they've looked it up or whatever. It's the same thing where you would want all of these questions to be convinced of a time traveler in real life, and it would have to be these deeply personal things that only you would possibly know.
Yeah, so it does seem like a big con sometimes, this idea of time travel, and it is sort of like it's completely unbelievable, and it's like, how can this be possible? And that leads us nicely onto next week's episode, where we'll be looking at the impossible. How can time travel possibly happen? Well, you know what? It's all down to aliens. So next week, we are looking at alien interventions in time travel films. And what films are we looking at then, Matt?
We've got Flight of the Navigator, childhood favourite from 1986, and Slaughterhouse-Five, the Kurt Vonnegut novel turned into a film from 1972.
Yes, 2 films where aliens intervene and come down and start weird, crazy time travel things going on. So that should be a lot of fun looking at those 2 films next week. In the meantime, if you want to get hold of us, we're on all the social media channels. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're at Through Sci-Fi or at Through Sci-Fi Pods. You can get us there.
Please review the podcast if you haven't already. Please do tell a friend about us. It'll help get the word out there. We appreciate it.
And if you want to email us, we're at journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com, or you can find us on our website, which is journeythroughsci-fi.com. That's it from us today. We'll see you next time.